Courage is exercised at the risk of losing something. Think about it. Let's say that again. Courage is exercised. The only way you can practice it is at the risk of losing something. For example, to display courage, you may lose your freedom when you're trying to stand up for right. Courage is exercised at the risk of losing something. Sometimes for courage, one might even lose their life. And if there is no risk involved, then there is no courage that is necessary. Again, if there's no risk involved, then there's no courage that's necessary. So David entered the army camp as the Israelites battled the Philistines. David came later because he stayed home to tend the sheep. He cared for the sheep now while his older brothers went off to war. And after several weeks, the war fell into a stalemate. And David's father had told David to go and deliver some food, some provisions for his brothers who were on the front line. But even though it was at a stalemate, the Israelite army already seemed defeated due to low morale. And history is a witness to many examples and instances where low morale has defeated an army. Understand that low morale leads to fear. Fear leads to panic. And panic leads to the collapse of an army. The reason for low morale was the relentless taunts of a Philistine giant. His name was Goliath, and he stood 9 feet 9 inches tall. And while in the camp, David had heard the taunts by Goliath to the Israelite army. He also heard the king's promise of a reward for anyone that was able to defeat Goliath. That would be given to all, again, who defeated Goliath. And scripture says that when the words that David spoke were heard, the men reported them to Saul, and Saul sent for David. So while David was listening and hearing the promises of reward, and hearing Goliath taunt the Israelite army, David was speaking his mind about the whole situation. He was appalled that the Israelites was just standing there and letting this giant blaspheme God. So David sounded like he had volunteered to accept Goliath's challenge. And that challenge was that someone from the Israelite army come out and fight him one-on-one. And with the provision that whoever won, the other armies would automatically surrender to the other nations. So King Saul had been looking for such a volunteer. David's inquiry was quickly sent up the chain of command until it reached the king, who wasted no time, I tell you, in sending for David. David said to Saul, "Let no man's courage fail because of him," talking about Goliath. "Your servant," talking about himself, "will go out and fight with this Philistine." So again, remember these words, let no man's heart fail because of Goliath. And I come to tell you this evening that we too can feel secure when we consider that our God that we serve is able. He's able to overcome our most difficult situations. He's able to overcome our circumstances. Then after hearing this, then Saul said to David, "You're not able to go against the Philistine to fight him, for you are only a young man, and he has been a warrior since his youth." In other words, he was born fighting. Now, understand that King Saul only saw things through his physical eyes. He only saw David as a weak youth. But he saw the Philistine as a warrior when he was born from his youth. And by the world standards, Saul was absolutely correct in his assessment. But Saul failed to consider the Lord's presence in David's life. Saul had forgotten how to see with his eyes of faith. But trusting in God means looking past what we physically see. Faith means to look beyond our circumstances and see what God sees. David knew the Lord would make him victorious. That's why David moved forward with confidence, ready to proceed, ready to fight. Criticism couldn't stop David, and it shouldn't stop you. While the army stood around, listening to all these insults, David was ready to take action. With God fighting for him, with God on his side, there was no reason that David could see the weight. And people will try to discourage you with negativity and foolishness. But you must continue to do what you know is right. Your behavior will please God, whose opinion matters more than anybody else. But David said to Saul, "Your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock. I went out after it and attacked it," talking about attacked the predator, "and rescued the lamb from its mouth. And when it rose up against me, I seized it by its whiskers and struck and killed it." So David's salutation, "your servant," reveals that he was already aware, self-awareness of his status before the king, that he was subservient to King Saul. But his response now indicates a pushback against Saul's skepticism. Those who think it's safer to tend sheep than go to war should think again. David proved his capabilities by his encounters with predators. These beasts are often more dangerous now than human adversaries. How David explained the sequence of events is noteworthy. Now pay close attention. David said he attacked, he rescued, and he killed. Talk about he encountered the beast. He didn't say, "I attacked, killed, and rescued." So the important thing that you have to look at now is where we put rescue. That means saving the lamb from the beast. Again, the first one, he said, "I attacked, I rescued, and killed." He didn't say, "I attacked, killed, and then rescued." Let me explain the difference. So the actual sequence indicates David's focus. His focus was to free the lamb from the jaws of a predator, a beast that he had only wounded. Now, when he attacked, increased the danger to David because the beast was not yet dead, and therefore there's a possibility that the beast could harm David. Again, the attack, kill, and rescue sequence would ensure that the predator was dead first, but it also required additional time before David was able to rescue the lamb. There was more time for the lamb to be killed with the lamb in the predator's mouth. It put the lamb at a greater risk while decreasing David's risk if he just attacked, killed the animal, and then rescued. So again, it put the lamb at greater risk, but it decreased the risk to David because the animal was dead when he tried to rescue the lamb. So it understand his choice, David's choice of attack, rescue, then kill, reveals something about David's character. He cared more for the lamb's safety than he did his own. So here is David now continuing the conversation with the king. "Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted and defied the armies of the living God. So the phrase uncircumcised Philistine is a derogatory remark. David cared and protected his sheep from the lions and bears. He believed that this work qualified him and prepared him to fight Goliath. He felt it prepared him to act quickly, to act skillfully, and to act decisively. The phrase, the living God, stands in direct contrast to the lifeless idols in the Philistine nation. These lifeless idols that represented false gods. Remember, and I remind you, there is only one God, and that is the God of Israel. And the Philistines and Goliath in particularly decided and chose to oppose that God. So David said, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. So lions and bears are often more dangerous than human opponents, especially for those in the era before guns. A lion may weigh between 265 to 500 pounds, and a bear may weigh about the same. Both of their paws conceal deadly claws. Each predator is well equipped and willing to use their paws in combat. So faithfulness must be our response when the Holy Spirit tells us to act, which it told David. David activated his faith before he confronted Goliath in the valley. So in other words, he had his faith was already active before he even went and considered Goliath. He recalled the faithfulness of God in all his past situations. David remembered all the ways that God had delivered him. King Saul didn't attempt to challenge David's logic and passionate belief anymore. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. So the situation at hand involved a change of tactics by the Philistines from their previous war against King Saul and the Israelites. It wasn't characterized by the size of the army. It wasn't decided by military maneuvers or the quality of weapons. The outcome of this battle was to be decided by a one-on-one combat, as we mentioned earlier. So in the verses between this verse, David had rejected wearing the king's armor. The king had offered him his armor before he went, but David couldn't fit it. David's victory would result from the Lord's faithfulness. It would not be won by wearing superior weaponry. Instead, David chose to take a staff, stones, and a sling. David had the greatest assurance that the Lord was in control. A sword, a spear, and a javelin are no match for an act of faith in God. Remember in Isaiah 54, verse 17, no weapon that is formed against us shall prosper. This is the heritage, I tell you, of the servants, of the believers of the Lord. David knew God was with him and that God would make him victorious. Goliath came out to battle in his own name, but David came out to battle in the name of the Lord. And do you ever feel trapped by overwhelming odds? But I come to tell you, but with God, there is always a way out, because he is the creator of all that exists. No problem is beyond his ability to solve. No circumstances is too difficult for him. And as they say, if God brought you to it, God will see you through it. We can always turn to the Creator, our God, for help in our time of need. So when the Philistine rose and came forward to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. When Goliath saw David, he was mad. He was thinking they sent a mere child to fight him. He was angry that Israel would insult him in this manner. But David had no trace of fear as he responded to the giant's curses. He had complete faith that the Lord would give him the victory. So each warrior moved to close the distance. They wanted to reach the best range for their particular weapons. Goliath's sword would be useful only within arm's length, even though both his arms and the sword were long. And although he might have been able to throw his spear a few yards, David's sling, by contrast, was artillery able to launch a projectile. In certain circumstances, a sling could go further than a bow and arrow. David, therefore, may seem to have an advantage over Goliath. David's weapons had greater range. He could start to fight from further away than Goliath was able. But that advantage could be negated by Goliath's armor. But in the final analysis, the ultimate advantage was with David. Why? Because the Lord, our God, was on his side. Goliath, who stood for all that was evil, was a terrifying presence. But like our enemy, Satan, Goliath was a toothless lion. Despite all his roaring, David was fighting in the Lord's name. In the end, it was no contest. As thousands watched, David slung his stone and Goliath fell. David put his hand into his bag, took out a stone and slung it, and it struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone penetrated his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. David's tremendous courage matched by his skill with a sling. To hit a forehead, which is only a few square inches, requires skill. The weapon, the sling, is deadly when slinging a stone with enough force. The stone hit the very spot that Goliath's armor didn't cover. Goliath received the penalty due because of his blasphemy against the Lord. The battle was between Israel God and the Philistines' false gods. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. And he struck down the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in David's hand. So understand that God uses his people to magnify and glorify his name to all the nations of the earth. The very weapon that David used, a sling, was a shepherd's weapon. It was almost the toy of a child. God used it to defeat the giant and rout the Philistine army. The Lord doesn't need swords or spears to deliver his people. He can deliver us in his own way, through the simplest and humblest of means. This passage also notes the minimal weaponry of David. Now, David had predicted that he would cut off Goliath's head. He told Goliath that. Now, remember, but he didn't have the sword. He would have to use Goliath's own sword to cut off the head. And by David's hands, that is exactly what happened. So, faith and responsibility are key aspects of walking with God. Faith is our decision to follow the Lord. and responsibility is how we live out our faith on this earth. If we move in confidence, we bring the love of the living God to others. If you like Christian content, please subscribe to our channel. Until we meet again, God keep you and God bless you is our prayer. Goodbye.